What is going on, guys? We are back playing some more Surviving with Create 0.3, and today we are going to be going over the Flywheel and the Furnace engine. Now, if you combine these two blocks, you will be left with the most powerful form of rotational power generation in all of Create, which is pretty darn awesome. It's going to completely outdo everything we've set up before, including the water wheels we did early on, the encased fans, which are running all over our base right now, and even the most recent setup we did, which is the windmill that is currently running outside. Even if we were to completely max out a windmill with 128 sail blocks and get it all the way up to 16 RPM, it would still not even come close to the Flywheel and the Furnace engine. It would be getting at most 1/2, if not 1/4 of the possible rotational power you could get if you continuously run the Flywheel and Furnace engine setup. But that right there is the most important thing to note. You need to be able to continuously run it, which is easier said than done because there is a major difference between the Flywheel and the Furnace engine and all the other methods of rotational power generation that I just mentioned. And that is that the rest are infinite, the Flywheel and the Furnace engine is not. Obviously, with things like the water wheel, you put down the water and they will keep running forever. You don't need to do anything. Same with the windmill. I'm not going to say you need wind for it because we're in Minecraft, there is no wind, but you need to put sail blocks down on it and then it will run forever. With the Flywheel and the Furnace engine though, you need to continuously supply burnable material to keep a furnace or blast furnace running that is attached to it to continuously get rotational power. So suffice to say, it's an awesome setup, but it's going to require a lot more investment than all the other ones, which makes it a little bit more balanced than you might otherwise think. So today we are going to be building upon what we did last episode where we set up the mechanical saw tree farm you see running in front of us right now, and this is going to supply us with a good amount of wood that we're going to put into a furnace, cook down into charcoal, and then use to cook even more wood into charcoal and just create one big cycle of generating a ton of rotational power. Now, I will say that you definitely do not need to have this exact setup, but you will need to have some form of farm or something that can give you a continuous supply of wood coming into your base so you can use it for this. If you're playing in a mod pack, you have a ton of different options for this. You definitely don't need Create. But if you don't have either of those set up so far, I would recommend you check the last episode out, as it's a very easy way to get a farm that will net you way more wood than you could possibly ever need for this. And today's setup is going to be designed by me. I spent forever on this one, specifically because all of the other ones I've seen have some pretty big flaws in them. They're super bulky. The one we're going over today is going to be what I think is the most compact setup I've ever seen for this. It'll hopefully be the most efficient, and it will address some of the problems that other setups have where they get overflows that eventually back up the system and it stops running and stops generating power for you, which could shut down your entire base if you're relying on it for powering majority of your things. So I'm pretty proud of how this turned out. Hopefully you guys think it's cool too. And there's a couple cool little tricks in here that we'll be going over today that hopefully you'll find useful in future builds. But we're about to jump into the crafting portion of today's episode. So for those of you who want to skip ahead to the next section of the video, you can feel free to do so where we're setting stuff up. But for those of you who choose to stick around and do the crafting with me, we are really not going to need to make a ton of things today, but the main ones we're going to be going over are the Furnace engine and the Flywheel, obviously. And both of these require us to do mechanical crafting in the mechanical crafters using 9 different blocks. So we're going to grab all this stuff out right now. And I've got my crafting slot covers, and we'll head over and use this. Quick note, I know you can use a redstone impulse for this too. You could just use a button, but we've got 12 covers. So you know what? We might as well put them to good use. And I think that should be good for the first setup. If we look at this, we're going to do the Flywheel first. So we need our brass casing and our regular brass ingots. And we'll just put all these down right here. And I believe it should start going. And it'll pop them out at the bottom here for us. The next one is going to be a little bit of an adjustment. We're going to have to move one of those covers for the center block, and then we'll just be using the brass casing, the brass sheets, and then 2 brass ingots, but this should be finishing up here. I always say that I should increase the speed of the cogwheel so this runs faster, but regardless, we're not going to be doing this too much. So there we go. The next one, we can quickly put down the sheets right here just so we have an empty hand to grab out the cover. Put this down here, and then I think I also grabbed the piston. There we go. So now this one should start running. finish up. I always think it's funny that it actually tries to fire all these around the outside too. So you actually have to wait for them to go before it starts the other blocks. Definitely interesting, but regardless, this will finish up in a second. And then the remaining crafts will be pretty quick, thankfully, so we can get right into the action of today's episode, which is why I know you guys are all here. So again, there really isn't much more that we need to craft for today's episode, but the main things are going to be the gear shift and the stockpile switch. And so this stuff right down here, a ton of redstone is going to be used in these. The gear shift is just 2 redstone dust, an andesite casing, and 2 cogwheels. And then the stockpile switch is a redstone comparator, iron, redstone, and a brass casing. Now that we have those, pretty much everything else in here is just some miscellaneous things that we're not actually going to be crafting today, but we're going to need 1 piece of charcoal. I have 4 here, but you really only need 1 for setting the filter on the stockpile switch. Then we're going to have 2 shafts, a mechanical belt, 2 andesite funnels, a hopper, piece of sand, a redstone repeater, and a cactus. And it's occurring to me right now that we might need 1 additional shaft. You know, guys, the funny thing is actually in this whole crafting, I totally forgot the main important part of this setup, which is the furnace. I didn't even think to make one of those, so you will also need a furnace for this. But now we should have everything we need to quickly head upstairs and start setting this up. And you will see that I have a new area for it right over here. This whole contraption is simply bringing up the wood and the saplings and all of that from our farm outside. And then over here, we have some brass tunnels that will sort it. The wood is going to be on the back. All the rest of the junk will be on the front here so that none of this is going to run into our furnace engine and flywheel setup. Eventually, I'm just going to dump this into a cactus to destroy it. I really don't care about it, but this will prevent us from getting our whole system backed up if we do that, and that would also prevent this from running. So if you're going off the same setup I did last episode, you're going to want something like this to sort it out. But if you just have a completely different setup, then you want to make sure that it's coming in on a single stream that only contains wood. Once you have that, we are good to start setting this up, and we will start by putting down the furnace. Obviously, this is the central block of this whole setup. This needs to be continuously running for it to work, and now we can put down the furnace engine and the flywheel on top of that. So you're going to want to orient it so that the furnace engine is coming out whatever side you want the flywheel to be on. It's going to be its own block that attaches onto this. And then finally, when you place down the flywheel, you want it to be 1 block away from the furnace engine. And just so you guys know, this is only outputting the rotational power on one side. So you want to make sure you orient this properly. But the main thing to go over is this can function with both the furnace and the blast furnace. And one of the biggest questions that I see people ask all the time is, why is mine not generating the same amount of power? You can actually get 16,000 rotational power from this, or 32,000 depending on if you use the furnace or the blast furnace, where the furnace will give the 16,000, the blast furnace will give the 32,000. There's no other difference in it with how you set it up. It's simply going to be which one you use, because obviously the blast furnace is going to be harder to run continuously, so they reward you by giving you more power. So if you're using the regular furnace, this will run at 16 RPM at 1024 stress units per RPM. And if you're using the blast furnace, it will go at 32 RPM, again at the same 1024 stress units per. It's still totally worth it if you're not using a blast furnace, but if you can make the blast furnace work, then go for it. But I just wanted to get that out of the way because that is one of the biggest, most common questions that people ask with this. So no, it's not you setting it up wrong. Now that we have that, the first thing we need to do is get the wood in the furnace, and that means it needs to go in the top, and the easiest way to do that is simply put an andesite funnel down there so that the stuff coming in from the mechanical belts gets dropped right in the top here. So that's a great start. Now we have the next part, which is going to be, how do we get out the charcoal that we have, and how do we get charcoal put back in here? And this is the part that I think is pretty creative and innovative, because what we're going to do is get rid of these planks right here, and we can just put them down right below it so it looks nice. But we're going to get rid of those, and then we're going to put down a shaft right here, and we are going to reorient them so that they are going horizontally like this, and then we're going to toss mechanical belts on them. Now the cool part about this is that you can utilize a very interesting mechanic with funnels and hoppers to make this belt take the output and use it as input. So the way we'll do this is by putting an andesite funnel right on the front of the furnace for input, because as most of you probably know, when you input the fuel for a furnace, it's going to come from the side, and then the output is going to come from the bottom. So what we want to do is come down here, and we want to make sure that this is not going to stop up our system with blocks that fall on it. But we're going to come down here, and that probably fell on there too. Gosh darn it. And we're going to put the hopper ejecting onto this mechanical belt. So what this will do is take all the charcoal that finishes getting cooked in the furnace, put it in the hopper, kick it onto this belt. But because technically the belt is going to be able to input one block up using this andesite funnel, it will then be able to input back into the furnace to use as fuel again. So that's a really easy way to circumvent these huge looped contraptions that people have to get all the charcoal that you use back into the furnace. But now the main issue is eventually, you don't have a huge buffer here. Eventually this will stop running because every piece of charcoal is going to create multiple new pieces of charcoal, and eventually your hopper will fill up. This will be full. It'll stop burning stuff and you'll run into a huge problem. So we're going to use some cool mechanics to deal with that too. So we're going to clear out this area right here, and we are going to start by putting down the stockpile switch right on this furnace right here. Now you want to make sure it's facing the furnace properly, and what this will do is it will read whatever inventory it is attached to based on what filter you set. So we're going to pull out the charcoal and put it in the filter right up here at the top. Now what this will do is read the amount of charcoal that is currently inside the furnace, and based off of that, it will either emit or not emit a redstone signal. So it's a little bit complicated to read, but basically what this means is that the bottom here is when the redstone signal will be on, the top here is when it will be off, and you scroll to adjust the percentages where it kicks from off to on and on to off based on what you want. Now this indicator on the far left here that looks like a chest means that it is currently off, and as the charcoal in the system increases, this will go up. Now for a furnace, we want this to stop at roughly 30%. You're going to have to experiment around with this. It depends on what you want, but we want when this gets to 30%, which will be about 60 pieces in this because it's got an inventory of 3 possible things that can be filled. So when it gets to about 30% full, which would be the fuel slot at roughly 60, we want it to kick the power on. Now it doesn't matter really where you put this bottom one. I can keep it around somewhere like 10. The higher up you keep it, the more frequently this is going to flip back and forth. The lower you keep it, the less frequently. So it's really up to you. I'll put it at 10. But what we want is when this system gets relatively full, it's close to being completely full of charcoal, we want this to start emitting a redstone signal. And then we're going to want to use that with a gear shift to turn the rotation a different direction. So what the gear shift does is when it gets a redstone signal, it is going to reverse the rotation that's currently going into it and put it out the different direction. So what we'll do is right now we have the rotation coming in to push items into the furnace. So every time charcoal comes out of here, when there is no redstone signal, it's going to go back in here, which means that every time that we have roughly 10% to 30%, it is going to continuously refuel this up with charcoal to make sure that it gets to roughly 60 and can keep running. But whenever we reach 60, we want to make sure that we're not putting the charcoal in here anymore. Otherwise, when we hit 64, we run the risk of it starting to get a backup and eventually stopping running. So the way we're going to get around that is this will flick on, and then it sucks that I didn't actually grab more blocks to work with here, but this will kick on, and then we are going to put down, I didn't even remember to grab regular redstone. Okay, well, I completely spaced out that we needed regular redstone, but I went and grabbed some. So we're going to put down regular redstone just like this. And what this will do is it'll turn this so that it reverses the rotation. And then all the charcoal that's coming out in the bottom hopper will get kicked out this side. And eventually we're going to set up a cactus down here so that it simply destroys the charcoal that we don't need. We don't care about it. Obviously, if you want to use the charcoal for something else, you could save it. But for me, I don't need all that charcoal. There's no use. Eventually, we might set up multiple of these and then we could use it for other stuff. But eventually, we will still end up with a surplus simply because every piece of charcoal generates multiple new pieces of charcoal. And so we're going to kick it off this side. But now there's a new issue we have to fix, because this andesite funnel, when this reverses, will start pulling out all the charcoal that's currently in our furnace. We don't want that because then it'll be totally empty. So what we're going to do is put down a redstone repeater right here that pushes into the andesite funnel. So what this does is the minute this starts reversing rotation, this andesite funnel will turn off. It will no longer function to pull items out of the furnace, so it won't suck all the fuel out of here. It will only get rid of the surplus that's currently going into the hopper until this burns through majority of its fuel supply, and then it will begin refueling itself. So what we can do now is actually start running this, and it'll start working, and we can use this time to put down the cactus, which will go right here. So we're going to dig down one, then dig down another, and we're going to have to get rid of all these blocks on the side here so we can put down the cactus, and we'll simply put down the sand right there to put the cactus on, put the cactus right there, and we will see that eventually when this starts kicking items off, they'll just get destroyed when they go right in here. So we can watch and see that it's running right now, and every time it produces charcoal, you'll actually see that you get a little animation down here of the funnel putting the items in. You'll get the little right there, whatever you want to call that. But that's because they get immediately put right on here and immediately put in because of how the functionality between the hopper and the funnel works. So eventually this will fill up. We can watch as this moves slowly towards where the redstone signal will kick on. So it will take a little bit. But what I might do is pretty much just wait here for this to get to that point, and then we'll watch it flip over and see what happens after. Okay guys, so as you can see from looking at the stockpile switch, we are almost at the level where the redstone signal should kick on, and we will get to see this in action. But I do want to talk quickly while we wait for that to happen about one thing that some people also have questions on, and that is you don't actually need to be burning anything in the furnace or cooking anything specifically down to have the flywheel and the furnace engine running. So as you probably saw when this started out, as long as you have something burning in there, it will continue running. You don't necessarily need to have something cooking. As I'm sure most of you know, you could have, one piece of charcoal used for one oak log and then allow the charcoal to burn for another 70 seconds without anything in there being cooked, and this would keep running. So there are some people who have setups where you will have a timer simply put in place to make sure you're using one log per one piece of charcoal, but that requires a relatively extensive redstone timer. And because we are getting so much wood, we actually want to make sure that we are not maximizing the wood for charcoal gain. So this setup makes it so that you won't run into many backup issues with the actual wood coming out of your farm too. So just something I wanted to quickly touch on, as I know that is in fact another option when you come to setting this up. Now you can see this is basically about to flip over, so it should be roughly around 60. That'll probably end up being around 57, 58 when it ends up flipping over, and we'll get to watch the redstone signal kick on. The graphic does look a little bit weird, but I think it comes from rounding issues where technically it's a little bit over, but we can see now that this is kicking on, and instead of sucking stuff out of the furnace, all it's going to do is once this is done cooking it down, it will take it from the hopper, kick it out, and put it in here and destroy it. And now we can see that it's going to go all the way down until it's at 10%, and then the signal will turn off and this will be allowed to fill up again, allowing this to continuously run without having to worry about a backup happening through the hopper. So it'll stop feeding into this andesite funnel, this will stop moving, the hopper will fill up, then inside the furnace, the finished completed inventory will fill up, and then you will no longer be able to cook anything and it'll stop running. So that is going to be it for today, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I am very proud of coming up with this setup. I think it turned out great. So if you guys have any suggestions on it, let me know what you think. Obviously, I'm totally open to making any improvements to this. So, and you guys always seem to manage to catch stuff that I don't. Obviously, there's things like I don't necessarily know if you need a repeater here or if regular redstone will suffice. Although I do think it looks kind of nice like this. But regardless, hopefully you guys found today's episode informative and cool. And hopefully you try this out in your world. But I will talk to you guys later.